I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today we're reviewing this, the Mercedes-AMG GLE 63S wagon. I say wagon body, but that's really just an easy way to differentiate this traditional SUV version of the GLE 63 from the slightly more popular coupe version of this car, which I've already done a full review on here on the channel. Speaking for myself, I actually prefer the GLE wagon, the more traditional two-box shape, because it's actually one of the last remaining AMGs that looks relatively subtle. I don't think you'd have much of an idea of the performance under the bonnet if you scrapped that Panamericana grille, which I think is a bit done. You painted the calipers black and you took off the badges, because it really just looks like any other GLE. But of course, under that bonnet, you do have something special. A 4-litre twin-turbo V8, 48-volt assisted, producing 450 kilowatts of power and 850 newton meters of torque, and that's before the mild hybrid architecture gets started up. So this thing is a true Autobahn stormer. But it's actually quite livable as a daily, partially because this one has been specified on, I can't believe I'm saying this, small 21-inch wheels and chunky tires, so it actually rides well. In today's video, we'll check out the interior, the back seats, the boot, we'll talk about the running costs, and then we'll head out on the road into the GLE 63S wagon and see what this bruiser is like to drive. But before we get started, make sure to hit subscribe down below. The cabin of the GLE 63S can either be really extroverted if you dress it up with a whole bunch of optional carbon fiber, or it can be a bit more subtle and luxurious, as this particular car has, I suppose, gone in the direction of. And I like that subtle perspective because I guess I'm a bit old school when it comes to AMGs. In the old days, an AMG was just a regular Mercedes-Benz with a big engine and a sport-tuned chassis, but little to really shout about from a visual perspective, and a lot of that has changed now, but this GLE 63 is a little more conventional, I guess, in that sense. So here in the interior, we've got lots of luxury touches like open pore wood, we've got black, super high quality seats with just a little bit of Alcantara to remind you this is the sporty version. Similarly on the steering wheel, Napa leather with some Alcantara at the 9 and 3, and these big cold metal paddle shifters that feel really good. Now, certainly you do know that you're in the GLE 63 because of these seats. They have heaps of adjustment, most of which is actually done through the central screen. Only the basic adjustments are done here on the door, where you also have your memory, your seat heating and seat cooling functions, but we have inflatable bolsters, we've got massage, we've got a whole bunch of special profiles to help keep you relaxed on long drives, which this car does pretty well. From a technology perspective, we have Mercedes-AMG UX as the infotainment driving these twin 12-inch screens, and it's okay. This screen is a touchscreen, it's relatively responsive, there's a little bit of lag. You can also control it with the left trackpad on the steering wheel or the trackpad between the seats. It definitely trails the iDrive system in the BMW X5 or X7 for ease of use, and the fact Mercedes scrapped their old rotary dial is a bit of a shame, but it works well enough. What doesn't get a free pass from me is the Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration, which is really lazy. It takes up the whole screen, but you only get a small slice, a low resolution slice of Apple CarPlay, and it's really quite laggy on this system. The Q7 and the X5 both have wireless Apple CarPlay, so it's odd that Mercedes isn't choosing to join that group at this point. What does work quite nicely though is the gauges ahead of the driver, controlled through the right trackpad on the steering wheel. There's a number of visual styles that you can choose, but it's clear, crisp, bright, and even though there's no cowl over the instrument panel, it's seriously super bright enough that it just blasts through any sun glare. So I understand some people in the comments have raised that might be an issue, but on the Mercedes products, I've never found it to be an issue testing these cars under the Australian sun, so there's that. Practicality, pretty good. We've got big cup holders here, wireless charging, generous bin between the seats, lots of USB-C ports, bottle holders in the doors, and quality seems to be pretty good. All screwed together quite nicely, a bit squeaky down here on this armrest, but one of the trade-offs of buying a GLE 63 or any top-tier AMG product is these vehicles are meant to be super stiff to make them corner like a sports car, even though they're a towering SUV. And as the years roll on, that stiffness is going to drive more of the plastics apart in the interior. So this vehicle is going to be eminently more rattly over time than something like a base diesel GLE, purely because that's a softer, cushier car where the chassis soaks up more of those bumps, whereas here it all sort of comes into these more brittle plastics in the interior because the suspension and the chassis is so stiff. Just a little bit of philosophy from Tom for your evening. So that's the front. Let's check out the back seat. The GLE is firmly on that mid-size to large category of SUV, and so you get a really generous back seat here. This vehicle only seats 5. If you want a 7-seater, you have to go for a smaller engine or for the bigger Mercedes-AMG GLE 63. But for 5 people, there is a good amount of space in this car. Sitting behind my own driving position, at 6 foot tall, I've got ample headroom, heaps of legroom, and decent toe room as well, despite these beefy front seats being quite a bit larger than the seats you get in other GLE products. You can get someone in the middle seat. There's a little hump in the floor, but this is a really wide SUV, so shoulder room isn't going to be too competitive. In terms of amenities, we've got air vents, separate climate zone back here, USB-C charging, and all of that leather-lined material on the doors, the Burmester speaker grills. All in all, it feels pretty nice. We've got a center armrest too, with 2 cup holders there. But it is worth pointing out that the GLS 63 really does feel like I guess a more primo limousine in SUV form in the back, because you get stuff like electric seat adjustment. Here in the GLE 63, the seats are just fixed, and you also get a fancy touchscreen in the armrest to control climate and infotainment and whatnot back here. This is a little bit more simple. I guess, you know, at 220 grand, it ain't cheap. But if you want all those extra bells and whistles, you'll have to spend even more with Mercedes-AMG. What about the boot space of the AMG GLE 63? Well, this is a big vehicle. You'd expect it to have plenty of cargo room, and it does. Underneath this powered tailgate, there's 630 litres of space. That'll expand out to about 2,000 litres if you drop those seats in the second row, which you can do from here in the boot. Keep in mind though, if you want your GLE with 7 seats, you'll have to opt for the GLE 53, which is the inline 6-cylinder AMG variant. Of course, you can step up to the GLS 63. That's a 7-seater with the same powertrain as this car and is basically the ultimate indulgence when it comes to Mercedes-Benz. Here in the boot, what we have underneath this boot floor is a space saver spare and a few other bits and bobs. In terms of other cubby spaces, we've got a netted area here. We've got a nice solid cargo cover, and we can also drop the car's air suspension at the rear to make loading a little bit easier. Of course, we have controls there to lower the power tailgate or lock the car. Last step before we get in and drive the GLE 63 is to talk about the running costs. Now, I'm not going to stand here in front of you and tell you that a lumbering petrol V8 SUV is a cheap car to run, because of course it isn't. But there are a number of things you can do to limit the running costs on this vehicle, and the main one is to purchase an upfront service plan from Mercedes-Benz. That will set you back $4,550 for 5 years and 100,000 kilometers of scheduled servicing. And honestly, under $1,000 annually to service a complicated V8 with a full drive system and all of those bits and bobs that need attention is, to be honest, cheap. So that's a good deal. Fuel consumption really depends on how you drive it. This vehicle will use just under 9 litres per 100 Ks on the highway, as tested by us. Of course, around the traps, combined driving, it's going to be more like 15 litres per 100 if you're tapping into the performance, but because you've got that mild hybrid system, it does keep something of a lid on the fuel consumption and the emissions of this vehicle. Now, insurance, in the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer spent $1,854 to comprehensively insure a new Mercedes-Benz GLE. Keep in mind that does take into account the whole range, and also everybody's situation varies, and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like who's driving the car, where you garage it, driving histories, etc. And lastly, warranty, impressively, is 5 years with unlimited kilometers on this vehicle. The best that rivals like Audi and BMW can offer is 3 years. So, what's the GLE 63S like to drive? Muscular is the first word that comes to mind. I mean, this is a brawny looking vehicle. You can tell that as soon as you look at it. And the experience from behind the wheel is one that pretty successfully mixes luxury motoring with performance driving, while keeping in mind the fact that it's an enormous box. that being said, for a big, heavy, wagon-bodied SUV, the GLE 63's handling characteristics are amazing, largely because of the attention to detail of the AMG engineers, but also the new possibilities being opened up via electrification. I know electrification is a slightly amusing concept when it comes to a 4-litre twin-turbo petrol V8, but the 48-volt system hooked up to the system in the GLE 63S allows so many additional features which affect the car's dynamics positively, and I'll come back to the ride and handling in a moment. First of all, let's talk about the powertrain, because it's pretty much the ultimate AMG 8-cylinder powertrain from a capability point of view. It's not, you know, the old naturally aspirated V8 that used to go into top shelf AMG M classes in the past, but it's an absolutely delightful twin turbocharged 4-litre unit producing some pretty stellar numbers. 450 kilowatts, 850 newton meters. That's before you add in the supplementary 16 kilowatts and 250 newton meters provided by the 48-volt system at certain points. It's not as simple as adding together 850 and 250 to get 1100 newton meters of torque, if only, but instead the electric system fills in gaps. Like if I'm in 8th gear right now, out of the 9-speed gearbox of the car, if I plant my foot, no turbo lag, because the 48-volt system fills in the blank with that immediate burst of 250 newton meters of torque. So there you go. Now, the GLE range is a big one in Australia, and that's because SUVs are bread and butter for Mercedes-Benz here. So you can get your GLE with everything from a 2-litre 4-cylinder engine right the way through to this 63, which is a pretty serious vehicle. In between, you've got some really lush 6-cylinder vehicles, or 6-cylinder options, diesel or petrol choices, and you've got another really interesting option in the form of the GLE 53, which I've also reviewed on the channel. That's a straight 6 petrol, really beautiful refined unit. You still get the 48-volt system, you get round quad pipes at the back, and it's just a little bit more subtle actually. So for people that love the history of an inline 6 as opposed to a V8, then the GLE 53 is a really cool option that I commend you to consider. So that's the engine. Obviously we've got some brute force going on here, and the GLE 63 moves very, very smartly in a straight line. I mean, if I just stop quickly, move this Manatino switch down here to Sport Plus and plant the boot. Nice crackles and pops on the overrun. It gets out of its own way. That much is pretty much safe to say. But AMG has always been about that. Fit a big engine to a large, luxurious Mercedes and watch it go fast in a straight line. In the past, vehicles like the BMW X5M and the Porsche Cayenne Turbo have been a little bit more impressive than fast GLEs or fast M classes in terms of dynamic ability. But that extent has been massively cut or even switched when it comes to this new GLE 63, which is genuinely impressive. Now, I mentioned the 48-volt mild hybrid system. Not only does that fill in torque when the engine is still winding up and the turbos are still spooling up, but it also powers active anti-roll bars in this car. So you turn in quickly, the 48-volt system, which immediately fires up, is stabilizing the car. So instead of that mechanical stabilization or hydraulic stabilization, it's powered by electric motors. And it keeps the GLE just remarkably flat in the corners and allows you to dig into more of the chemical grip of the tires, which of course, driven hard, the GLE is going to go through tires at quite a clip, and replacing 315 width 21-inch Continental Sport Contact 6 tires at the rear is going to be a costly exercise, so keep that in mind. They're staggered 275/45 at the front. And you've got huge stoppers as well, which is important in a 2-ton vehicle like this to actually get it down to a halt pretty quickly. But you get this really nice meatiness through the steering wheel, but the rack is actually fairly quick. It's a really good combination. I would prefer a fully leather wheel than the Part Alcantara, but I understand it's a cool touch. But you get this immediate crisp turn in through the front wheels. The ratio is near perfect, and the chassis can actually stand up to it. Plus, We've got the ability to cycle torque left and right entirely at the rear end. So if you plant the boot coming out of a corner, particularly in the more serious drive modes where the stability is relaxed a little bit, you can certainly feel some power oversteer effect from the rear end too. So while no doubt I would prefer an E63 wagon instead of a GLE 63 SUV, you can't get one in Australia, you just can't. People didn't want it anymore. So if we have to put up with fast SUVs instead, this is how to do it really well. It's comfortable, it rides well on 21s, big asterisk, don't go for bigger wheels, okay? I think the 21s look cool enough, but they deliver high grip and high comfort, and that's what you actually want in a car like this. It rides really, really well. Recently, for a bit of backgrounding, I drove a GLS 63, the 7-seater, on 23-inch wheels, and after 5,000 Ks on the clock, that car sounded like it was ready to rattle itself apart. Not exactly luxurious. This GLE 63 has the same amount of Ks on it, give or take, but we've got much smaller wheels, 21s, much smaller 21s, and taller sidewalls, and the cabin integrity is perfect, no rattles at all. So keep that in mind. I would go for the 21s. Anyway, so refinement levels are pretty good, specified this way. It's fairly quiet inside. Obviously we've got aggressive tyres, so we are hearing that whir, constant whir from the tyres on this smooth bit of highway here. Nod to the interior, it's quite high technology, as Mercedes are liking at the moment, but it's a pretty nice interpretation in this car. We've got the wood, the leather, looks good to the eye. The view out of the car is really good, and the safety systems are well tuned. Pretty good, strong, intuitive lane keep, adaptive cruise, AEB, 360-degree cameras, blind spot. I haven't felt the need to argue with any of it or turn it off, which is the mark of a well-tuned system. If I don't really care about it or don't really notice it, it's working. So all in all, yeah, this is an expensive car, it's an indulgent car, but importantly, the symphony comes together well. You know, a lot of effort has gone into this GLE 63, and you can tell. So those are my detailed impressions of the AMG GLE 63S wagon. This vehicle is a total indulgence. It's 220 grand before on-road costs and options. It's a huge petrol V8 bruiser, and yet it all comes together really quite nicely in this specification. So my recommendation would be, yeah, if you want the ultimate GLE, this is a good one to go for. It may be the last time we see this petrol V8 mild hybrid combination that works so well in this model, but I'd be disciplined and stick to the 21s because it delivers you a car that you will want to drive every day because it doesn't rattle your bones out, and that's always, you know, a benefit. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, whether this is a vehicle you'd consider. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.